Affairs don't begin in the bedroom, they begin in childhood. In the part of you that decided she needed to bury her truth just to be loved. The part that's now screaming to be seen. I'm Alex Croxford, and this is the Deeper Love podcast, where we name the shame, face the guilt, and help you find your way back to yourself. So let's begin. I was definitely Googling at 3 o'clock in the morning, how do I forgive myself for cheating? And if only it had been as simple as Google telling me you need to do X, Y, and Z, and then you're going to forgive yourself, and then your husband is going to forgive you, and all will be right with the world. And alas, it was not that simple. And self-forgiveness takes time, as does the forgiveness of our partner. But the truth is that I thought the answer was going to be found in me forgiving myself. I thought that was the goal. That's what I needed to get to. I needed me to forgive me and for him to forgive me. And then once that had happened, I would be free from the pain I was carrying and we'd be able to move on with the rest of our lives as if nothing had happened. Here's the thing with that. Skipping from pain of betrayal for both parties to forgiveness means we are missing this rich journey of self-discovery and awakening that we are being called on through this pain. Because at the core of my work, I believe that when we have an affair or there is infidelity in a relationship, we are being called home to ourselves, because that pain is impossible to ignore. It is so brutal. There are very few things that can match that in life that don't involve death. And if we just skip to trying to forgive ourselves, we are not answering the call that our soul is actually asking us to go on. And that is a journey of awakening to who we really are. And yes, look, I'm not going to deny that now I am sat here having forgiven myself and my ex-husband having forgiven me. That feels like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders, off my chest. It's not something I think about anymore. I wish that it hadn't had to happen that way. And yet it's not something that sits heavy on me anymore. But I am also so aware and so grateful of every part that I had to go through in order to finally forgive myself and to be sat here today. Because if I hadn't done all of those things, I actually wouldn't have been able to forgive myself in the way that I have. I still think there'd have been this essence of shame and guilt still that lived in my body and my mind, and actually there is zero, which I can't tell you how unbelievable that is, considering 7 years ago I actually wanted to end my life because the shame was so unbearable. So I want you to understand that it's not like I skipped into this. I have had to do the work to get here, but the self-forgiveness and the forgiveness of my ex-husband, that wasn't the answer to me feeling alive and free and connected to myself and in my own power and living as my most true, authentic self. It wasn't the thing that made me quit my 20-year career in TV and start an entirely new coaching business supporting women in a way that feels totally like it lights me up. It's not the thing that made me finally speak out on social media, what I'm doing, and start a podcast. Forgiving myself wasn't what got me here. Forgiving myself wasn't the thing that found me this incredible relationship that I am in right now. One with a man that can meet me and hold me and love me for all of me. Forgiving myself wasn't the thing that can finally make me receive love and enjoy pleasure and allow myself to be messy and imperfect and be a beginner at things. Forgiving myself wouldn't have given me any of that. What gave me that was going on a journey to understand who I was beneath the patterns that had led me to cheat in the first place. And when I started this journey, I didn't know that. I had no idea. I thought I just wanted to feel better. Because let's be honest, that's all we want to do. You're probably sat here listening to this thinking, oh my God, Alex, all I want to do is forgive myself. Why are you saying this? And no, I get it, but I also want to be real with you. And I don't want to skip along to what everyone else thinks that they need and why we go and have therapy or go on or any other coaching courses, whatever. Like, I'm here to give you something different. I'm here to give you what your soul is actually asking for right now. And that's why I'm going to be real with you, and I'm going to be honest with you, and it might feel uncomfortable and it might be things that you don't want to hear, but this is the truth. And I am so grateful for every single part of the journey that I had to go on to get to self-forgiveness. Like, how incredible that I can feel so in alignment with who I am. How incredible that I can feel the pleasure that I can feel in my body now, that I can feel the love that I can feel in my body now, the joy, the bliss. That was not accessible to the version of me before my life completely blew up. There's not a hope in hell. The way that I found bliss and joy and pleasure was by going to festivals and getting completely blasted. That's how I escaped. That's what I thought fun was. That's what I thought freedom was. And now I see that freedom is actually living as who I really am. And that's what I learned before I got to forgiveness. And so I'm sure you're like, okay, cool, Alex. So how did you do that then? So let me tell you. When I started working with my first coach, and I'll be real with you, over the years, I have invested, I would say, around 120 to 150,000 pounds. That's not even dollars. Dollars is probably 150 to 170,000 dollars, something like that, in my own development. And to some of you, that might feel completely insane. It might make some of you feel really awkward. You might want to turn off the podcast, and I get it. I was the same, but I want you to understand how much of a quest I have been on to really understand myself and understand the root of infidelity. And so when I started working with my coach in 2019, I was convinced that all I needed to do was forgive myself and for maybe my husband to forgive me if I chose to tell him, and that would everything would be right as rain and we could just crack on and forget it ever happened. I had no idea what I was getting myself in for, if I'm really honest with you. I'd never even had therapy before, and I had stumbled across, which I don't believe anything's an accident. So my soul had found its way to a coach that worked in both the body and the mind, which back in 2019 was very out there. She was a transformational coach. I invested £5,000, which at the time felt so much money, to work with this woman for 3 months. And I was convinced at that point, when I first started working with her, that I had had a perfect childhood. Both my parents were together. We had money. I went to private school and a grammar school. Like, I had everything that I really ever wanted. I had, friends. There was no big trauma that I could remember in my childhood. And it felt like she kept trying to push into what happened in my childhood. And I was very resistant to this because I felt like I was betraying my parents in some way. But I remember one day she was quite, straight with me. She was like, Alex, we're either going to go there or you're not going to be able to do this work. And I was like, okay, fine. And before I go any further, one thing I want to say, my parents did the best that they knew how. And I am so grateful for them, and I love them with all of my heart. And my nan and anyone who I ever talk about on this podcast, they did absolutely everything that they thought was right for me, and I am so grateful for what they did. And yet, no childhood is perfect. It is impossible for parents to meet every need of a child. Children are little narcissists. They think the entire world revolves around them. And when a parent can't meet a need of a child, that child will make a story up in their own nervous systems about them, what it means about them. So if a parent has not been able to pick the child up when she's crying, that child won't think, oh, well, mummy's busy, so she'll probably come and pick me up in a minute. I'll be okay. That child's nervous system registers this as abandonment, and I obviously don't matter. So, therefore, this child, and I'll tell you a story that reflects this in my own life, that child then makes a decision, well, obviously, I don't matter and I can't have needs. So they will live their entire life, and future relationships, by the way, will mirror that story back to them over and over again. And this is exactly what happened to me. When I was 3.5 years old, I was with my nan and my baby sister, who was in a pram. And we were about to go for a walk, and I was there with my nan's dog, Tina. It was a little Yorkshire Terrier that refused point blank to go anywhere without my nan, like would sit on the floor, would not move. If you pulled the lead, didn't care. If my nan wasn't there, wasn't moving. This particular day, because obviously this was the trauma that I had to go through, so even Tina the dog was in spirit supporting me to have this trauma. I thought my nan was behind me with my sister in the pram, and we were walking from my nan's house to a local park, which was probably about a 5-minute walk. Not far, but it meant crossing roads, it meant walking down streets on my own, it meant getting to the park on my own, and I did that with the Yorkshire Terrier on a lead. And I remember getting to the park and looking around and realizing I was on my own with the dog, and there was a woman in the distance I kind of recognized, and I remember waving at her. And obviously, unbeknownst to me, my nan had realized I was missing, had gone to all knocking on all the neighbors' doors, thinking maybe I'd gone to one of the neighbors, sent out a search party, and within a few minutes of me being at the park with Tina the Yorkshire Terrier, all of a sudden 2 men arrived. One I recognised as my nan's neighbour. I didn't know him that well. He was called Sid, but I recognised him. And then there was another man who I didn't recognise. And the man that I didn't recognise was the one that picked me up, and they put me in the car, and he put me on his lap, the one that I didn't recognise. Sid was driving. Tina the Yorkshire Terrier was in the back of the car, barking non-stop, yap, 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 like Yorkshire Terriers do. And because I was screaming, the dog was barking, the man whose lap I was on put his hand over my mouth to stop me from screaming. I mean, who does that to a 3.5-year-old? Anyway, this was obviously very traumatizing to me. But when I got to my nan's house and I was let out of the car, I think by the time I got to my nan's house, I disassociated. And they let me out, and I walked into my nan's house, and I remember my nan was sat on the chair in the corner of her room, and her partner at the time, Harry, was there. And I remember her turning to me and being so angry with me. She said, "You naughty girl, how dare you leave me," or something along those lines. And I could see that she was in a lot of distress and obviously very angry with me. And in that moment, well, I mean, I had no recollection of this, how I felt in this moment, because I'd almost just turned this whole thing. It was just a family story, all the time that Alex went missing, and Nanny couldn't find her, and she had to send Sid out, and mum and dad couldn't get there in time. It's become this like family story that we tell over and over again. But what this work did when I started to go into the body, I started to do something called regression therapy, which was taking me back to that moment in time in my nan's lounge when I walked in, and I realized that my nan was really angry with me and I had done something wrong. And in that moment when my nan's emotions were more important than mine, that's the decision that I had made. I saw that my nan's emotions were more important than mine, and that I was bad. And in that moment, which I went back to so many times, I can't even tell you, so many coaching sessions, we went back in regression to this moment where I realized that I had been living my life from the story that I decided in that moment, which was my feelings don't matter, I don't matter, and I'm bad. And that story had imprinted on my nervous system. And from that story, I created an entire survival mechanism of being perfect, of being good, and of not having any emotions. Because the opposite of being bad and having needs is to not have needs and to make sure that you are self-providing. You don't need anything from anyone because actually you don't matter. So if you don't matter, then no one is going to ever meet your needs. And if you're bad, then you need to be really good. You need to be almost perfect in order to counteract that, in order to be able to be accepted and loved and chosen by your family. Because at 3.5 years old, well, I mean, really up until the age of maybe 11, 12, to be honest with you, a child isn't going to survive without the love and care of an adult. And so we will do anything, we will shape ourselves to be able to be accepted and chosen and loved by our adult caregivers. And so, over the years of working with my coach and doing this very deep inner child shadow work, meeting these young parts of myself, there were lots of other young parts of myself that I met that had also created stories about who I needed to be in the world and how I needed to survive. And it was like every time I met a young part, and as I said, sometimes more and more times I had to meet them. Every time I met them, by coming into the body and finding those frozen moments that were still stored in my nervous system, it was like I thawed out. I didn't have to be the ice queen, the one that was in control all the time, the one that had to be perfect, the one that didn't have to need anyone, the one that had to put everybody else's needs and wants and desires first. That way of surviving was no longer necessary, because who was actually running the show now was the adult version of me, the one that knew that boundaries were important, the one that knew I had needs and it was okay to ask for them, the one that could handle rejection if she wasn't perfect and she was her truest self. And so this was the evolutionary work that I had to do before I got anywhere near being able to truly forgive myself. Because by the time you've met all of these young parts which have very, helpfully learned how to survive in the world, and let them know, you know what, they don't have to do it in the same way that they've already done. They don't have to keep stopping you from being seen, or they don't have to protect your heart. They don't have to keep your heart closed so that you can no longer feel the grief of that pain that's underneath. Then you began to be able to open and soften and experience something new. And that's what I honestly believe the pain that you are in right now is calling you towards. Yes, self-forgiveness is important. Yes, if you can be forgiven by your partner, oh my God, like magic. I'm so grateful for that. But as I said, if you just aim on to that, first of all, you're probably not going to just reach self-forgiveness without doing a lot of the deep inner child healing work too, without meeting the younger parts of you that have led you to perform love or be perfect or not have any needs or people please or put everybody else first. That's why, if you've been having therapy for years and you can name all of these patterns, you know that you abandon yourself, you know that you people please, you know that you think you need to be perfect in order to be loved, you know that you put everybody else's emotions first. Great. You even might know when the trauma happened in your childhood. Oh, it's because mum wasn't available or dad left when I was 3 years old. We can know these wounds and we can know the patterns that might have led us to having an affair, but that is not the same as actually healing them. And healing them takes going into the body, understanding them cognitively, going over and over and over it in our mind does jack shit. Sorry, I'll be real with you. We have to start to reprogram the system, because in reprogramming the system, we can actually start to come home to who we are, which is beneath all of these ways that we learn to survive in the world. We're moving from survival into thriving. And that's what this pain is calling you into. And I know right now it feels so far off to think that one day that you could thrive and one day that you could live in alignment with who you really are and as an authentic version of yourself and not feel like you have to be X, Y, and Z in order to be loved. I get it. I have been there. But it's just that you're not doing the right work yet. There's a whole world of work, somatic, body-mind work that can support you to be able to lead a life like this. I have women that have come through the healed heart, and it's so funny because towards the end, they'll say to me, is it bad that I don't feel the guilt and the shame anymore? And I'm like, no, no, it's not. It doesn't take away your accountability. It doesn't take away your remorse. It doesn't take away what you've learned from this. Because again, that would be spiritually bypassing and skipping over really important things. Like, we have to learn from this, right? We have to learn restraint, and we have to learn that we have to look at what's going on inside of ourselves that leads us to act outside of our moral values. That's what the invitation is. So doing this work doesn't then negate it all and just mean that you get to forgive yourself and, oh, it's all gone away and nothing matters anymore. That would completely negate the purpose of the whole thing. And actually, I would argue that this work, because it's not easy, this work, it's beautiful and it is profound, and it will give you aliveness and freedom and sensuality and connection to yourself in ways that you've never felt before. But it's not easy. If it was easy, everyone would do it. But what it is it is life-changing. It is life-changing because you finally, after 30, 40, 50, 60 years, get to meet yourself. And if right now you are in the pits and you are desperately wondering how you are going to forgive yourself and move through this, I see you, I get it, I have been there, and so have many, 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 many of my clients. The first step I am going to recommend is you download my Aftermath Survival Guide. You can use the link in the notes. It's a free resource. It's all yours. Do the things in the guide. It's not by any means going to take you to aliveness and freedom, but it will help soften where you are right now and help you take that first step, like first aid, towards who it is that you are becoming. I will see you next week. Thank you for listening to the Deeper Love podcast. If today's episode spoke to you, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you're ready to go deeper, you'll find all the ways to work with me in the show notes. Until next time.